Hey, what's going on, party people? Robert Jenkins here, coming to you from the Moon Mine Productions studios, the current iteration of those studios. Anyway, I'm sitting here in the seat perilous as always, and I'm coming to you with the latest episode of the North Star podcast. Now, if you know anything about the North Star, historically, that was it was a star that was used to navigate from slavery into freedom. And the reason I named this show the North Star Podcast is because my whole goal as an individual and my whole desire and purpose and aim and hope and prayer for everybody out there listening is that we collectively, but as individuals, are able to move forward from slavery into freedom. And so that's why this is called the North Star Podcast. Now, I'm going to talk today a little bit more about socialism. If you have checked me out and been peeping me out and checking out what I'm saying, you know that I got this thing about socialism. It's something that's sticking in my craw, and I got to talk about it because this is at our point in time in 2020, really for the last decade or so, and building into what we're seeing now. And if you really take a broader look for the last century or more, socialism has been creeping into the fabric of American society and creeping into the political processes of American society, slowly but surely, as my grandma used to say. And that slow creeping march, that stealthy approach of socialism, that's called Fabian Socialism. And the Fabian Socialists, I touched on this once before, was a group of people who realized that you can't just bring in socialism overnight. You gotta mix. It's like boiling a frog. Y'all have heard that expression before. You can't just take a frog and throw him in some boiling hot water. He'll jump out. However, if you put a frog in some nice, comfortable room temperature water and slowly raise the heat on him, he'll stay there allegedly until he cooks to death. He gets so hot it's boiling. Next thing you know, he dead. He getting cooked. He floating with his belly up. You know what I'm saying? Well, that's what Fabian Socialism is. Now, as I say, the reason I keep dwelling on socialism is because, simply put, socialism is the biggest threat, or one of the biggest threats of our time. And the reason I say that is because all human endeavor, everything that mankind has ever done well and done good, has been started at the impetus or with the action or by the action of one individual. And then that individual is able to bless society with whatever his gift is. I mean, think of anything. Think of any technology you want to think of. Think of computers. Think of like Microsoft, Bill Gates. Think of airplanes, the Wright brothers, two brothers, in their shop. Think of them, what was it, in South Carolina? In a bicycle shop, building airplanes. What have they done for mankind? How has that advanced us to where it used to take 6 months to go somewhere coast to coast? If you was going to ride out to the West Coast and try to find gold in the 1849, 1850 time frame, you was riding out there in a covered wagon. It took you 6, 7, 8 months. You would suffer and die and have to resort to cannibalism sometime. Who stopped that? The Wright brothers, two individuals making an airplane in their bicycle shop. Who came up with penicillin? One guy. Who came up with the process of pasteurization to help kill germs as well? One guy, Louis Pasteur. So it's always an individual that uses their God-given talent to help move mankind forward. Now, the danger of socialism is that it takes people who have not yet used their God-given resources and talents the way they should be using it. They feel a sense of envy and a sense of hatred for those who are using their God-given talents. And they want to take from those individuals. And they are taught to envy and hate those who are powerful and wealthy and good. And it's like I said, it's usually the weak, the less powerful, and those who are not really taking advantage of their own God-given gifts and abilities. So that's why socialism is so dangerous, because it will eventually halt the forward momentum of mankind. All of the good things we have that have, by and large, come from talented individuals bequeathing gifts to mankind, from God to that individual, from that individual to mankind. Socialism will halt that. And that's why I'm so vehemently against it. I say against sometimes. You know why? Not because I'm a Texan. Down there we say against. But Malcolm X, I used to listen to him when I was younger, and he would always say against. So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm on my soapbox. I catch myself saying against. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I'm gonna continue here if y'all don't mind. Sorry for that digression. But socialism then it's an evil, in fact, that will actually, I think, in the long run, halt the forward progress of mankind. Even though they call themselves nowadays progressives, there ain't nothing progressive about them. What they progressing toward? Slavery and death? Slavery is socialism is slavery in slow motion. So I'm gonna get into this a little bit today. Today, what I'm talking about, my contention is that Christians cannot be socialists and still call themselves Christians. In other words, if you think you're a Christian, if you call yourself a Christian, or you desire to be a Christian, a disciple of Christ, a follower of Christ, you cannot be a socialist and do that. Now, you may think I'm full of it, because socialism, again, with that whole slow creeping death, more stealthily sneaking up on you, that whole wolf in sheep's clothing, Fabian Socialism thing, another way they trick you into thinking that socialism is something good is that they always talk in terms of helping the needy, helping those who need, from each according to his ability. So if you have a lot, you're supposed to give a lot. And if you don't have a lot, you're supposed to just be able to give a little bit. The thing they don't tell you about that is it's not that you're voluntarily free to give. And you're not the one deciding how much you can give. So this is touching on why Christians can't be socialists. Now, I've heard some pretty educated Christians, some pretty high up, important, knowledgeable, Spirit-filled Christians say that certain things in the Bible seem to point at socialism being okay. But that's because they're missing a key factor. And the key factor they're missing is, like I just kind of touched on, socialism is based on force. Socialism is based on we're taking your stuff because we say so. Now, one of the books in the Bible that people often touch on when they say that the Bible or supports socialism or that Jesus would be cool with socialism, that's Acts 2:42 through 47. And I'm going to read that whole verse there. It's not that long. And then we're going to dissect it. But before I do that, let me go ahead and read to you a definition of socialism. Now, I got this definition off of LouRockwell.com, and it's an article by a guy named Lawrence Vance. And in this article, he's actually doing a book review, and the book review is from Tom DiLorenzo's The Problem with Socialism. So Tom DiLorenzo, and by the way, if you look down in the show notes, you can see where I'm going to link to all this stuff. So if you want to get that book, The Problem with Socialism, that's down there. If you want to read this article by Lawrence Vance, Socialism Laid Bare, the link to that's going to be down there. But I'm going to excerpt this little quote out of that article on LouRockwell.com. And Lawrence Vance was saying that socialism was originally just a designation for the government ownership of the means of production, in contrast to capitalism, which signified the private ownership of the means of production. And he points out that the guy who wrote that book, The Problem with Socialism, Tom DiLorenzo, he says, as DiLorenzo points out in his introductory first chapter, socialism has evolved in the 20th century to mean income redistribution in the pursuit of equality, not through government ownerships of means of production, but through the institutions of the welfare state and the progressive income tax. Socialism involves the government imposition of one plan for all of society. Indeed, socialism is the forceful substitution of government plans for individual plans. That is so key. Socialism is not something nice. It's not caring about poor people and wanting to pay them money and give them money, which is terrible in the first place because you want to teach an individual to fish, not give him fish. That's an old saying. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, because it's always better to teach somebody how to do for themselves than it is just give them stuff. You give people stuff, it actually creates hatred, anger, and envy. When people earn stuff for themselves, they see how hard it is to earn and they appreciate it. And they're willing to give away excess sometimes. That's an individual choice. But socialism says it's not an individual choice to give away your excess. It's a must. And if you don't, we're going to take it and give it to who we say. That's what socialism is. I want to read that last line again. Socialism is the forceful substitution of government plans for individual plans. You see that? It's when the government comes in and uses force. And by the way, everything the government does is predicated on use of force. If you don't believe me, next time you get a parking ticket, don't pay it for 2 or 3 years and see what happens the next time you get pulled over, and see don't you get taken to jail. Even though it's just a ticket for parking or speed and you ain't even hurt nobody. That's force. Everything the government does is predicated on force. George Washington said that government is like fire. It is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. And he said that is because fire is force. It's the force to burn things. Well, that's what government is. So everything they do rests on the threat of using force. Socialism is the forceful substitution of government plans for your plans. You ain't got no plans. I plan for you. I'm the government. This is what I say. This is what I say goes. That's what socialism is. Now, in the Bible, that verse that people sometimes, oftentimes interpret to mean that Jesus or the disciples or somebody somewhere in the Bible was cool with socialism. As I said, it's Acts 2. Verse 42 through 47. You ever notice how it's hard to read them verses and chapters? Even preachers and stuff stumble on that. You be trying to say all these Acts 2, 40, saying a bunch of numbers. It's almost like doing math in public. Not quite as hard, but there it is. So we're looking at Acts 2, verses 42 through 47. I'm going to read this. So before I read this, I'll set it up a little bit. This was after Jesus was murdered by the Jewish religious leaders in conjunction with the Roman authorities at the time. Really, the Romans kind of said, yeah, that's Jewish. Y'all do what y'all want to do. And the Jewish authorities murdered him. And in the aftermath of that, the disciples, the 12 disciples of whom Peter was the apparent leader, they were walking around in that area where they used to prophesy, or where they used to walk around and do Jesus's ministry. And they were still doing the same thing. They were basically trying to carry on without the master. And in that book, Acts 2, chapter 42 through 47, called The Fellowship of the Believers, it says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and they had everything in common. They had everything in common. It says they sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily the number of people who were being saved. Added to their number daily those who were being saved. So it says they had all their goods in common. It says they sold their stuff and provided food, because what had happened was all these people had come from all over and they were gathered around the disciples, and there was many people that needed to be clothed and housed and fed. And the disciples, in order to do this, took their property and sold it and used the proceeds to give unto those who were in need. So that almost sounds like something the government would say, oh, it's socialism. That's why people mistakenly say it's socialism. But what you'll notice there's one key element that's missing. And there's a couple of key elements that are in place that let you know that they are not talking about socialism. What's that key element? Yeah, you guessed it. It's force. There's no force in there. Do you see anybody in that verse saying, hey, all y'all sell all y'all stuff and give me the money and I'm going to dole it out to those less fortunate? No, that's not in there. It says they took their stuff and sold it and took the proceeds and used it to attend to the needs of those who were present that needed stuff. That was voluntary. That is the key thing about socialism. Nothing that socialism ever does is voluntary. That's why socialist regimes, if you look at back through history, they always end up with mass incarceration, mass suffering, and mass slaughtering of needless, wanton waste of human life. Because at some point, people start saying, wait a minute, man, this is my stuff. How are you taking my stuff? Oh, what? You don't like it? Guess what? I got an army, son. What you gonna say now? See how it's always force. It always goes to that. It may start off nice and warm and fuzzy, but it always goes to the extreme of the waste of innocent human life and the absolute impoverishment of whatever nation it is that's engaged in that whole socialist practice. Because what you're doing is you're taking from your talented individuals who honestly probably would have given you some of the proceeds of what they had developed and what they had raised and created. Now of course, they're going to want money in return for it. That's the way the world works. That's capitalism. That's how you do voluntary exchange. You take your energy and put it forth into work. You get paid, and you pay some of your energy, some of your money, which is just a symbol for your energy and your production. You pay that to another person for their energy and their production. If you don't do that, well, like I said, at some point you start realizing, well, these people don't want to give me what I want, so you're going to have to take it. So it's force. Now, how is that anti-biblical? How is that anti-Christian? How is socialism not compatible with Christianity? Very simple. In Christianity, there is no force. In that passage that we read there, you saw no force there. Nobody came in and made those people sell their belongings. Oh, and what did they sell? Their belongings. They had purchased previous things. They had earned homes and fields and crops and pottery and swords and plows. That they bought it. They earned those things, or they made it. They purchased it or made it. That's capitalism. They took those possessions that they had legally acquired through trade with others, voluntary exchange with other people, and they voluntarily sold them to other people who voluntarily paid them, and they took that money and fed those who were in need. You see how ain't not one scintilla, not one iota of force involved in any of that. And not only is there no force, there's actually plenty of free market capitalism involved there. And I would say to you that, capitalism is not a perfect system, but it's better than all the other ones. So how's that old saying go? Capitalism is far from perfect, but it's better than anything else we can think of. Capitalism is the only system where you can say, I want a computer. You don't know nothing about writing code. You don't know nothing about making plastics. You ain't got nary scrap of precious metals to make the components that make up the computer. And yet everybody I know has at least one computer. If you count their smartphone, everybody got a computer almost that I can think of on the planet has a computer in their pocket. And most people have 2 or 3 other computers that they have access to. But yet only a very small percentage of the population know anything about computer codes or making computers, building computers, even really how to use computers half the time. How we got one? The wonders of capitalism. The capitalism is basically a voluntary way to exchange energy for things that you don't have. And money is a symbol of your energy. But it's the fact that it's voluntary that makes it peaceful, that makes it compatible with Christianity. And if you're not buying what I'm saying, you're still thinking there's some kind of socialism in Christianity and Christianity is cool with socialism. Well, before we even get to after Jesus was murdered, he didn't pass away. He was murdered. Let's get it right. After Jesus was murdered, let's go before that. When Jesus used to talk about the 10 Commandments. And I think in the 10 Commandments, I think it's the 10th commandment. And it's I got this down here somewhere. Hold on. Oh, yeah, it's in my notes right here. In Exodus 20:17, Exodus chapter 20, verse 17, it says, the number 10 of the 10th commandment is, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet. That means strongly desire and want. You shouldn't be strongly desiring and wanting your neighbor's house. You shouldn't be strongly desiring and wanting your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or his donkey or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. You should not be strongly desiring. You should not be envious and jealous and covetous of what your neighbor has. Well, socialism is based on envy and greed and strong desire for something that somebody else has. And that's why you end up using force to take it. Because if you wanted something that somebody else had and you did it the right way, you would ask them, hey, man, can I buy some of that milk from you? Hey, man, you sure make cool computers. Can you make me one? How much you need for that? I'll till your land if you make me a computer. I'm mixing time frames up like a mud. You're going to till somebody's soil and get a computer. I don't think that happened too much no more. But y'all know what I'm talking about. It's the free exchange of energy, and money usually is the symbol of energy. The free exchange of your money or energy for somebody else's something of value that they have. And they have to want to give you that thing. If they don't want to give it to you, you can't buy it. And you dang sure can't take it. Because I think there's another commandment that says thou shalt not steal. I think if you're trying to take somebody that something that someone has and they don't want to give it to you, and you say, well, I just take it by force, you most likely end up killing them. I think there's another commandment that says something like thou shalt not murder. It says thou shalt not kill, but I've heard religious scholars explain it and say it really means thou shalt not murder, which is to kill without just cause. So you see, any route you go through that whole socialistic, communalistic means, if it's not voluntarily done, it breaks really the spirit, if not the actual letter of the Ten Commandments. And it also breaks the example that Jesus set for us. And so in that way, matter of fact, Jesus summed up all the commandments. He said, in everything, do unto others what you would have them do unto you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. And that's, I think that's the Ten Commandments and the Psalms and Proverbs. That's what that law and the prophet means, if I'm not mistaken. So Jesus said that the most important commandment is love God and then love your neighbor as you love yourself. Or in other words, in everything you do, do unto others what you would have them do to you. That's like the summary of all the Ten Commandments. Now ask yourself the question, would you have your neighbor take your stuff by force? Of course you wouldn't. So you're directly going against what Jesus is describing here if you use socialism in any way, form, or fashion. And socialism is communism too. Socialism is slavery in slow motion, and communism is a more extreme form of socialism, essentially. But they cousins. You know what I'm saying? One is the little brother to the other, and it leads inexorably towards communism. Socialism leads to communism. In fact, there's hardly a dime's difference between the two of them. I mean, it's hard for me to even think of what the true difference is besides to what extreme they go. So here's the thing. Nowadays, people describe themselves as democratic socialists. Bernie Sanders, AOC, cats like that. We democratic socialists. What they trying to say is we going to take other people's stuff by force, but it's not really by force because we going to vote to take their stuff by force. That's nonsense too. Think about it. Can I come to your house with a gun, bust your door down and say, give me all your money and all the stuff you got in this house of value? Is that wrong? Is that illegal? Right? It is, right? I think it is. Well, what if I don't come to your house with a gun? What if I just get together with 5 other dudes and we say, hey, we just made a rule. We can come to your house with guns and take all your stuff. Does that make it still? Is it cool now because I got 5 people? What if I get 50 people? What if I get 500,000 people to vote and say, we're going to come to your house and take all your stuff. And if you don't like it, we're going to use force against you. It's still wrong, ain't it? It don't matter how many people say it's okay. Taking people's stuff by force is wrong, right? Well, that's what democratic socialism is. Democratic socialism is theft smoothed over by the fact that a bunch of people allegedly voted for it. Well, it don't matter what you. That's why we don't live in a democracy. People always forget that this is a democratic republic. Democratic republic means that we have individual rights that the majority cannot run roughshod over. They cannot come to our house and take our stuff just because they voted for it. It's still wrong. So I think just going over that little piece there, I think you can see if you're what do you say, if you got eyes to hear and eyes to see and ears to hear. I always say if you got your eyes and ears on, because, you know, I'm a gun dude, so I be putting on my eyes and ears at the range. That's how we say it. It means the same thing. In this case, I'm using it to mean the same thing. You got your eyes and ears on. You can see that socialism is wholly and completely incompatible with Christianity, and that the verses, Acts 2:42 through 47, where it's talking about how the believers voluntarily sold their possessions, made money off of the sales of their possession, and voluntarily gave it to help those who had come to be with them that needed to be taken care of. You can see there's no force in that. And you can see that that is wholly incompatible with the government saying, hey, your plans for your stuff don't matter. This is my plans for your stuff. Huh? How you got plans for my stuff? See, you see where the violence and the force comes in? Right there when you say, huh? How you got plans for my stuff? What's the next answer? What's the answer to that? What you mean, how I got plans for your stuff? I got plans for your stuff like this. And this is force. So I think I don't even probably have to dwell on that anymore. But what I will say is beware of those who appear like wolves in sheep's clothing. I would say outwardly they are gentle, meek, humble lambs. Oh, we want to help everybody. The people are so poor. Certain people can't afford to do this, and they had these bad things happen to them in life, and I'm sure they did. I don't doubt that there's people out there who are people in need, but to take care of those people should be a voluntary decision on the part of those who are able to take care of, just like Jesus left it up to his disciples, just like God leaves it up to all of us to make a voluntary decision. There's free will. It's got to be free will. When you start using force to force somebody to do something, you take that free will and that voluntaryism out of the equation. That becomes slavery and theft, which eventually leads to murder and death. And that is why we got to beware of all these socialists. That's why I keep talking about socialism. It's not cute. It ain't fun. It ain't compassionate. It ain't progressive. It's regressive in the worst sense of the word, because mankind has been slaughtering mankind for millions of years. I say millions. People say we only been here 200,000 years. I'm not so sure of that. But I know however long we've been here, man has been taken by force from other men. Now we just use pretty words like democratic socialism to take by force from other men what we need. But it's still the same thing. And if you don't believe me, try to say no. See what happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the North Star Podcast. This is your host sitting in the seat perilous, as always, Robert Jenkins. Thanks for tuning in. You can catch me on iTunes. You can catch me on Stitcher. If you like this video, I'm trying to get all this social media. You see all this. I ain't 100% hip to all this social media stuff, but I know it's a big part of what I'm doing here. This is social media. So you can catch me on YouTube. You can catch me at the northstarpodcast.com. You can catch me on Twitter. In fact, hit me up on Twitter if you agree or disagree. If you, like I said, if you disagree, you go to the front of the line. I want to talk to you first. So you can hit me up on Twitter at, I think it's at @Northstar_Rob. At @Northstar_Rob. Hit me on Twitter. Hit me on not Facebook. I ain't on there yet. But you can catch me on Stitcher. You can catch me at the website. I'm on YouTube, North Star Podcast. Like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Ring my bell. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, there's my naked, brazen appeal to support. So again, thanks for tuning in to the North Star Podcast. And as always, I bid you 2 digits.